Hello, everybody. I had a student actually post on the discussion board about problem 9-25 in your textbook, and then how that relates to the question number 1 on the second assignment. So let's look at the question in the book. So I'm not going to read through the question because it's quite long, but basically we are given some information about actual results and a static budget. So like static budget was for 700, here it's laboratory samples. So a static budget doesn't change with the volume of business that's happening. The static budget stays the same. They figure they're going to do 700 samples, and they do a budget based on that. So when the actual number differs from the static budget, you're going to get variances. But a lot of those variances are going to be caused just because of the difference in the work that was done. So we are asked to prepare a new performance report for September using a flexible budget approach. So the flexible budget, the difference is it's a budget based on that you can change based on the volume of activity. So let's go take a look at the solution. So it tells us here, the cost formulas in the flexible budget performance report below were obtained by dividing the cost from the static budget in the problem statement by the budgeted level of activity. So what that means, here we go. So we're told what the level of activity is, and then we're given our variable costs and our fixed costs. So for our variable cost, we know, for example, medical supplies was 10,640, and we know that was for 700 units. So if you divide the 10,640 by 700 units, you'll get the cost per unit because it's a variable cost. Lab tests, the same thing. You take the total amount and you divide it by the number of samples in the static budget. So you do that for all of the variable cost. Fixed costs are going to stay the same. So now if we look back at the solution, we can see, so if we had taken I forget what the number was already, 10,640. If you divide that by 700, you get 1520. If you take the amount for the lab test and divide it by 700, you get 1845, and so on. So that is our per unit variable cost. So now we can compare the actual costs that were incurred and the flexible budget based on that same level of activity. So the actual costs are just completely copied over from the actual that's there, and the level of activity is 920. So now we can take these per unit costs and we can do a flexible budget based on 920 samples. So if you just take the variable cost amount here and multiply it by 920, you'll get these amounts. So now what we're comparing is what actually happened at an activity level of 920 samples compared to what should have happened at an activity level based on 920 samples. Now the variances that we're going to look at will have a bit more meaning. So for example, medical supplies, the cost incurred was 14,878, but based on the budget, the cost that should have been incurred was 13,984. So we know that actual was higher by 894. So because actual was higher, it's going to be unfavorable. Lab test, actual 16,173, but the flexible budget, so what should have been spent based on that level of activity, was 16,974. So actually the actual amount was less. It did better. So it was less by 801, and because the actual was less than the budget, it's favorable, and so on. So we're comparing apples to apples here at the same level of activity. Now, fixed costs, again, fixed costs stay the same within a relevant range. So unless we're told otherwise, fixed costs are going to stay the same. So you just copy the numbers over. And again, fixed costs things can happen to change fixed cost. Equipment could have been purchased, sold, utilities. There was a budget, but maybe there was a rate increase, or various things happened to change fixed costs. So now we can look at our variances a bit better. Then in the second part, Do you think any of the variances in the report should be investigated? Well, one, you kind of look at the size to see, but one thing they mention here, the favorable variance for lab tests. Again, why? That's something I would look that should be investigated. Why was it so much? Why was the actual so much less? Were we taking a cheaper, like a cheaper route, cutting corners, doing something? But other than that, you'd go through, you'd look at the size of them. Were any of them particularly large? Were any, except to here, something other than what you would expect? It was favorable, but why? Okay, now to look at the assignment. Here. So the assignment was kind of the same thing. You're given some data. We're given the actual costs that were incurred, and we're given the static budget. And we have to prepare a report that would be useful in assessing how well costs were controlled in this department. Now, we asked, should we use Exhibit 9-5 as a guide? And I have that opened here. So in a nutshell, yes. It's not going to be exactly like this, but use this as your guide, because we are given actual and static. Now, if the level of activity had been different in our static budget than it was in our actual, you would have done what we just did in that question, in question 9. You would have taken the static budget, gotten a per unit cost for the variable expenses, and then you would have done a flexible budget based on that per unit cost. You would have looked at the activity level under the actual and did a flexible budget based on that. That's what we just did. Here, we have the same activity level. So, what I want to see then is, still want to see it in the same format. Where's my solution here? So you still want to see the same format here. I want you to still work out a cost formula per unit. Then you're still going to have the actual cost, and you're going to have the budget based on the actual activity, and then you're still going to have your variance. So similar, very similar to this, keeping in mind that the level of activity is the same under both. Okay, if you have any other questions, post them on the discussion board, and I will do my best to either respond or do a video or something to help you out. Bye-bye.